Hey there, survivors. Tonight we uncover two diaries from the earliest days of the zombie outbreak. One by Daniel Whitmore, fighting to keep his family safe, and one by Kayla, his sister, who became something more than just infected. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. June 1st, 2025. Final days at the hospital. I have decided to keep a detailed account of everything happening around us. My name is Daniel Whitmore. People in our city have been whispering rumors of some strange illness, but nobody really knows what it is. As of today, my biggest concern is my sister's health. Kayla has been at Westwood General Hospital for months, undergoing treatment for cancer. She was diagnosed nearly a year ago. It was heartbreaking for all of us, but Kayla faced it with the kind of determination I never knew she had. The hospital staff told us she was doing well enough to be considered stable. 2 weeks ago, we genuinely believed her greatest battle was coming to a close. Then we started hearing news reports about a new outbreak, something that causes high fevers, fatigue, and occasionally disorientation. Still, nobody thought it was a crisis. The doctors at Westwood assumed it was just an isolated issue somewhere else. Kayla got a phone call from the administration this morning. They explained that most stable patients were going to be discharged because the hospital needed to prepare for a potential influx of new cases. The official on the line sounded nervous but tried to stay professional. Kayla told me it was a blessing in disguise. She was excited to leave the hospital and come home. Later this afternoon, I drove to pick her up. Hospital corridors felt emptier than usual. We used to see staff coming and going, chatting about daily routines, but now everyone was either rushing or glaring at their phones with worried expressions. I passed by a few rooms where anxious visitors whispered to patients, sometimes glancing out the door as if expecting trouble to arrive at any moment. Kayla met me in the lobby. Her hair was still thin from chemotherapy, yet her eyes shone with that same resolve she's always had. She declined a wheelchair or a nurse's arm, insisting she could walk on her own. I asked if she felt nervous about leaving, but she reassured me, saying, "I'll be fine once I'm home." We signed her discharge papers. That was when Kayla mentioned a nurse who had checked her vitals earlier in the day, a woman named Sharon Dawson. Kayla said she coughed a lot, even though she wore a mask. I didn't think much of it. After all, hospital staff get colds like anyone else. But there was a moment when Kayla's expression turned uneasy. She kept touching her sleeve. Kayla said, "I think it was because of the cough." I told Kayla not to worry. We had no clue this tiny detail would come to mean so much. June 2nd, 2025. Transition home. We got home pretty late last night, so I didn't have time to write. Kayla was exhausted, but in high spirits. Our parents, Martin and Valerie, decorated the foyer with a small welcome banner. It wasn't elaborate, just something they printed out and taped together, but Kayla smiled when she saw it. Mom offered Kayla her favorite homemade soup, which we always made for her when she felt under the weather during treatment. She politely sipped some but soon claimed she was too tired and needed rest. I accompanied her to her bedroom, helping her unpack a few hospital belongings, get well cards, some personal journals, and a small potted plant the nurses gave her as a goodbye gift. I noticed Kayla rubbing her temples now and then, but she kept saying she was fine. Our dad insisted on taking her temperature just to be sure, but it was perfectly normal. She joked that we were hovering too much. We laughed it off. Before going to bed, Kayla mentioned that the hospital had been strangely quiet. There was a sense of urgency around the staff, as if they were anticipating a flood of new patients. She heard rumors that some newly admitted individuals arrived with fever and confusion. The staff avoided using the term infectious, so Kayla figured it wasn't serious, or maybe they just weren't certain what it was. Mom and Dad wanted to watch the late news, hoping for an update, but they ended up falling asleep on the couch. I flipped through channels. All I saw were vague stories about unusual clusters of illness in scattered parts of the state. The anchors didn't offer anything concrete. They only recommended that people keep calm and follow any health guidelines. June 3rd, 2025. Bringing Kayla home, officially. Today, Kayla really got settled in. It's odd to call it bringing her home again, but she spent her first full day back in her room since leaving the hospital. Our mother fussed over her, cooking comfort foods and adjusting the blinds to let in light without glare. Kayla seemed happy, though still fatigued. In the morning, she told me about a dream she had. I dreamt I was back in the hospital, except it was empty. No staff, no patients, just me wandering the corridors. She didn't elaborate further, but I could tell it bothered her. We tried to avoid discussing the rumored infection. Dad made a run to the supermarket because social media was blowing up with warnings of potential shortages. When he returned, he said the lines were incredibly long and people seemed on edge. He managed to get canned foods, water, and basic supplies. Kayla half joked that it sounded like we were prepping for a disaster. In the afternoon, I sat with Kayla while Mum was in the kitchen and Dad was sorting groceries. Kayla rubbed her head and said she still felt a lingering headache. I reminded her that she had gone through some intense chemotherapy recently, and it might take time to fully recover. She nodded, agreeing that it must be her body adjusting after being in the hospital for so long. That evening, the local news confirmed that Westwood General Hospital was reducing non-emergency patient intake to handle a sudden influx of viral respiratory cases. They didn't say it was life-threatening. Still, Dad glanced at Kayla nervously, as if afraid the infection might be tied to her cough at the hospital. None of us said it out loud, though. June 4th, 2025. Subtle changes. Kayla woke up earlier than usual, around dawn. She had circles under her eyes and seemed distracted, staring out the window more than normal. Mom brought her breakfast on a tray, scrambled eggs and toast. Kayla barely touched it. Later, she explained that her stomach felt unsettled. We wondered if it was related to a cancer medication or lingering effects of therapy. Throughout the day, she had bouts of coughing, short and sharp. She claimed it felt like a throat irritation. We offered her tea, water, anything that might help. She accepted politely but still coughed. It wasn't constant, but each time I heard it, my mind flashed back to the nurse she mentioned. Could it be that same sickness spreading in the hospital? Toward the late evening, Kayla tried to watch a comedy film with us in the living room. Partway through, she excused herself. When I checked on her, she was sitting quietly in her room, lights off, massaging her temples. She said the brightness bothered her eyes. We're all worried, but we keep telling ourselves it's just the stress of moving from hospital to home. We must let her rest and give her space. Still, an uneasy feeling gnaws at me. June 5th, 2025. The infection takes hold. I've decided to label today in my diary because something shifted noticeably in Kayla's condition. She's been coughing more, and this morning she had a very light fever, just enough for the thermometer to register. Mum hovered around with cold compresses, but Kayla brushed her off. She said she didn't feel hot, just tired. Later, I found Kayla awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She kept rubbing her temples in slow circles. She told me, "It's like a dull buzz in my head." No matter what she did, drink water, close her eyes, or take mild pain relievers, nothing got rid of it. By late afternoon, Kayla refused dinner. She barely touched her food, only sipping a bit of juice. When Mom offered her some chicken broth, Kayla just stared at it. Then she gave a slight grimace, sliding the bowl away. None of us knew how to respond. We worried maybe it was a flare-up related to her cancer. On the news, the national broadcast started mentioning erratic behaviors in some infected individuals, though they avoided graphic detail. They wouldn't say zombie, but online rumors exploded with that term. Meanwhile, official guidance was to stay indoors, avoid contact with symptomatic people, and keep calm. The contradiction was eerie. Kayla dozed off early, so Dad lowered the volume on the TV. Nobody wanted to scare her. June 6th, 2025. Spread of the outbreak. I keep hearing the phrase, the outbreak, on every channel. More neighborhoods in our region report pockets of unusual infections. People describe them differently. Some claim the infected wander aimlessly. Others say they become violent. Police stations are asking for National Guard support. Everyone's on edge. Mom, Dad, and I took turns checking on Kayla. She was calmer today, but distant. At times, she simply stared out the window, occasionally coughing into a tissue. She seemed to lose all interest in food, which is especially concerning. She drank water, but only in small sips. I stayed in her room for an hour, reading parts of an old journal I kept during her cancer treatments. I hoped it might remind her of her determination and positivity. She listened quietly. When I finished a passage about one of her brighter chemo sessions, she just nodded. I asked if something was wrong. Her only reply, "I'm thinking." Outside, the streets are eerily quiet. People who can leave town are reportedly doing so. Stores are packed or closed. Dad tried to get more groceries, but came back with only a fraction of what we needed. Panic buying is definitely happening. June 7th, 2025. The first sign of something unnatural. I'm labeling this entry because I can't shake the feeling that what happened today was beyond normal illness. This morning, Kayla woke up with an odd discoloration on her forearm. It looked like faint, branching veins darker than usual. She also coughed heavily for a few minutes straight. Then, out of nowhere, she laughed it off, calling it just a weird bruise. But I could tell she was concerned. Later, when Dad tried to feel her forehead, Kayla pulled away, almost in a defensive posture. She told him not to worry, claiming she wasn't contagious. Her voice carried an odd edge I'd never heard before. The power went out in the afternoon. Rolling blackouts, the radio said. Officials asked neighborhoods to conserve energy. We had no air conditioning, and the summer heat made everyone irritable. Kayla dozed off in her chair, mumbling words we couldn't interpret. Mum spent hours calling the hospital, but phone lines kept redirecting us to generic messages. We turned on a battery-powered radio. A medical official avoided the word zombie, but admitted the virus caused aggression, confusion, and an increased appetite for unusual consumables. They advised quarantining symptomatic individuals. That was the first official suggestion that something more was happening. I saw the fear in Mom's eyes. June 8th, 2025. The night it became real. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a loud noise from Kayla's room. The hallway was dim, lit by a flickering candle we'd placed on a stand. Mom and Dad rushed there too. Kayla was on the floor, leaning against her bed frame. She breathed heavily, blinking in slow motion. She told us she was all right, repeating it multiple times, but her voice sounded heavy. Dad helped her onto the bed, and she refused the glass of water he offered. The strangest part was a dark patch on her wrist, almost bruise-like, creeping in thin lines toward her hand. She seemed aware that I noticed. She glanced at me with an expression that said, "Don't make a big deal of this." We guided her under the covers. She eventually fell into a restless sleep. None of us really slept after that. June 9th, 2025. Confirming our fears. 3 days after that incident, Kayla began losing more hair, which was already weakened by chemo. She'd wake up with strands of it on her pillow. She no longer seemed to care. She spent increasing amounts of time gazing out the window, sometimes for an hour without moving. I asked if she was hungry, and she'd say, "Not for what you think." Mum tried to maintain normalcy, cooking meals, tidying the house, but it felt forced. Dad was more direct, often checking Kayla's temperature or trying to engage her with small talk. Kayla responded politely but briefly. She never lost her civility, which made it even more unsettling. Our neighbor, Mr. Langley, stopped by and said the National Guard had set up checkpoints. He urged us to evacuate while we could. Mum thanked him, but we didn't leave. Kayla didn't seem stable enough to travel. That same day, Kayla confided in me that her mouth tasted metallic, like iron. Mum tried to examine her throat with a flashlight, but Kayla refused. She muttered something about being irritated by touch. Dad looked at me with alarm, but we had no solution. June 10th, 2025. Deterioration and discovery. By now, it's been a full week since Kayla started coughing. She's developed a strong aversion to sunlight, covering her windows with blankets. She says bright light strains her eyes. She also started locking her door for a few hours at a time. When she emerged, she seemed calmer, but also more distant. News reports mentioned the word zombie in quiet, uncertain terms. They showed blurred footage of people moving sluggishly, sometimes biting others. Authorities called it feeding behavior, though they gave no further explanation. Dad decided to make a pharmacy run for Kayla's medication refills, but the lines were long and store shelves mostly empty. He got a few basic supplies and hurried back home. That evening, Kayla walked into the living room and asked if anyone had heard from Westwood General. Mum said the lines were down. Kayla shrugged and said, "They wouldn't be able to help me anyway." Hearing her say it so casually made my stomach twist. I realized she might suspect she was infected with whatever this was, but not in the standard sense. Still, she never lost her mind or turned aggressive like the news described. She remained coherent, just changed. June 11th, 2025. Confrontation with the truth. Late tonight, Kayla asked me to step outside with her. The moonlight cast long shadows in our unkempt backyard. She stood near the fence, posture stiff, eyes reflecting pale light. She told me she didn't feel human anymore, that a craving gnawed at her every moment she was awake. Her voice was calm, not frantic. She confessed that this all might have started with the coughing nurse at the hospital. She suspected an infection from the moment the nurse's mask slipped. She said, "I kept telling myself I was fine, but something changed the day I left that building." Kayla reached for my arm, her grip unnaturally strong. I instinctively pulled away, but she released me before it turned into a struggle. She apologized, explaining that she senses warmth and that it calls to her. It's not a typical hunger. It's something deeper, impossible to satisfy with normal food. I asked if we should try another hospital, a different city. She shook her head, saying no doctor could fix this. My mind wanted to deny it all, but seeing the faint branching lines on her wrists and her increasingly nocturnal behavior left me no illusions. June 12th, 2025. Growing influence. Kayla spent most of the day in her room. Mum prayed on the other side of the door. Dad paced the hallway, occasionally peeking through Kayla's door if she left it open. Meanwhile, I started hearing strange noises outside, like shuffle steps and faint groaning. We used to see normal neighborhood activity. Cars leaving for work, kids playing, neighbors gardening. Now it's mostly silent. Late in the evening, I looked out Kayla's window and spotted a figure standing completely still near our mailbox. Its posture was slack and it wore tattered clothes. Kayla appeared behind me and whispered that it wouldn't enter the house unless she allowed it to. Her voice was so certain. I turned to question her, but she was already walking toward the front door. I followed her to the porch. Through the crack in the door, I saw Kayla lift her hand slightly. The infected individual took a hesitant step back, then slowly wandered away. Kayla closed the door and retreated to her room without explaining. I stood in the dark, realizing that somehow she can communicate with these infected beings. June 13th, 2025. Family realization. By now, Mom and Dad can't ignore Kayla's abilities. She moves through the house quietly, occasionally glancing out windows at the street. We see more of those infected people shuffling around. Some cluster in small groups. They never try to break into our home, though we've heard stories of break-ins elsewhere. One afternoon, Kayla curled up on the couch, her breathing shallow. When I approached, she warned me to keep my distance because she couldn't trust her impulses. Mum cried in the kitchen. She and Dad argued in hushed tones, wondering whether we should do something drastic. But Kayla isn't violent. She's still Kayla, just different. None of us can stomach the idea of harming her. Meanwhile, the news coverage has turned chaotic. The government officially labeled the situation an outbreak, urging people to stay indoors and avoid contact with infected individuals. Some states declared emergency measures. Electricity has become unreliable. We rely on candles, flashlights, and battery radios for updates. I started writing more diligently. The days blur together, so I'm labeling each entry by the day of the outbreak rumors. Day 10 of outbreak rumors, June 14th. Kayla stands on the porch in early morning, watching 2 or 3 infected in the street. They seem drawn to her, but they don't attempt to enter our yard. It's as if they're awaiting her signal. She doesn't speak to them, just stares. After a few minutes, they wander off. I've noted her skin is colder to the touch, though she doesn't seem to notice temperature changes. Day 12 of outbreak rumors, June 15th. Mum tried giving Kayla a protein shake. Kayla took one cautious sip and grimaced. She sipped water but otherwise refused all food. Later, she admitted she can sense the fully infected ones nearby. She claims they lack conscious thought, but they react to her presence. She has some form of influence over them. It's strange, and it scares me. Day 15 of outbreak rumors, June 16th. We've had no power for 2 days. Dad confirms the city's infrastructure is breaking down. People are evacuating, but roads are clogged with abandoned cars. Kayla sleeps in short bursts and mostly roams the house at night. Her condition is stable, but she's definitely not what she once was. She rarely speaks, except to offer cryptic comments about controlling her hunger. June 17th, 2025, the family's breaking point. We finally confronted something terrifying tonight. A lone infected figure approached our door around dusk, banging against it with surprising force. Dad pushed furniture in front of the door to hold it back. I peeked through a gap in the curtains. The figure's eyes were wide, its jaw moving in a strange, repetitive way. Kayla appeared at the end of the hallway. She locked eyes with the figure, and the banging slowly subsided. The infected individual backed off, arms hanging limply at its sides. Kayla mumbled something I couldn't hear, and the figure turned around, stumbling away. Dad stared at Kayla, then asked how she did that. She walked back to her room without answering. During a small dinner of canned vegetables, Mum quietly asked, "Kayla, what exactly are you becoming?" Kayla replied, "I'm still me, but I'm also part of them now." She tapped her temple lightly as she said, "them." None of us knew what to say. June 18th, 2025. Decision to search for supplies. Our food and water are critically low. We're sharing small meals to stretch the supplies. Dad and I decided someone must venture out to find more. Kayla insisted it should be me. She said if Dad went, she wasn't sure how she might react to his absence. Early this morning, I gathered a backpack with a flashlight, water, and a short list of essentials. Canned goods, medical supplies, anything that might help Kayla. Before I left, she placed her hand on my shoulder. The contact felt electric, her grip too strong for her slender frame. She told me, "Be careful. If something infected approaches you, don't act on fear. Let me see if I can guide them through you." I didn't fully understand, but I nodded. Then she handed me a small medallion she used to wear, something she got as a gift during her initial cancer treatments. She said, "This is to remind you I'm with you no matter what happens." June 19th, 2025, my final words. I'm writing this part from an abandoned gas station near our neighborhood. I intended to be home by now. After walking half a mile, I reached a grocery store. The place was ransacked. Broken glass, empty shelves, the smell of decay. I managed to collect a few cans and a bottle of water. As I left, I stumbled into a cluster of infected individuals by the alley. They stared at me with that vacant look, but I swear there was flicker of recognition in their eyes, like they sensed Kayla's connection. For a moment, they hesitated. Then one of them lunged, arms outstretched. I dropped the supplies in panic and ran, darting between buildings. Eventually, I found this old gas station. Its windows are boarded, but I managed to slip in through a side entrance. I've barricaded the door with some loose furniture. It's nearly dark outside. The infected wander close by. I hear them shuffling. My phone is useless, no signal. The battery is nearly dead. I can't reach Mum, Dad, or Kayla. If anyone finds this diary, please go to our house on Maple Avenue. Kayla might still be there with my parents. She's unlike the others you see on the news. She retains her mind, her memories, and an ability to control the infected. Maybe she can help. I only hope she doesn't blame me for not returning. I never wanted to abandon them. That was the last entry from Daniel Whitmore's diary. Now we turn to the writings left behind by his sister Kayla.
I found Daniel's writings when I realized he hadn't come home. It's unsettling to read his words. He called me strong, but I don't feel strong. I feel torn between my old self and something I can't fully comprehend. My name is Kayla Whitmore. I was in the hospital for cancer treatment when this unknown virus began its spread. I suspect I got infected because a nurse coughed near me, though I never blamed her. She looked sick herself, likely unaware of how bad it was. The doctors insisted I was stable with my cancer, so they sent me home. It should have been a happy milestone. Instead, it brought this nightmare to our doorstep. The virus changed me in ways I didn't think possible. Unlike the mindless infected, I can still think, speak, remember. But I also feel a deep craving that can never be satisfied by normal food. My body is no longer entirely human. Certain aspects of my cancer have vanished. No more intense pain, no more constant weakness, but what replaced it is a constant hunger that focuses on living warmth. It's terrible to admit. Worse, I have some link to the others like me, those who lost their minds completely. I can sense them, like faint signals on a radio dial. They obey me if I concentrate. I can beckon them closer or push them away, but every time I use this power, I feel more of my humanity slipping. Day 1 of Daniel's absence. Daniel left early this morning, determined to find supplies. I placed my old medallion in his hand. He used to joke that it was a lucky charm during my chemo sessions. I hoped it might protect him now. Around noon, an uneasy sensation washed over me, like panic, but not my own. I tried to reach out through that mental link I have with the infected, searching for any sign of Daniel. It felt like I was scanning through static. Then the sense of him was just gone. I can't explain it better than that. It's as if the connection to him flickered off. I can't tell Mom or Dad. They're already worried enough. I keep hoping he's just out of my range, safe somewhere, waiting for the right time to come home. Day 2 of Daniel's absence. Mom and Dad debated going after Daniel. They paced the house, occasionally peeking out the windows or opening the door to see if he was nearby. The infected wander the street day and night now. Some houses look abandoned. Vehicles remain parked, but no lights come on at night. Our battery radio crackles with sparse broadcasts, urging people to seek government quarantine zones if they can travel safely. We have no idea if that's feasible. My craving worsens each time I sense the infected outside. It's like they amplify my hunger. I keep my distance from Mom and Dad because I'm terrified I'll do something unforgivable. Dad tries to talk to me, but I can't hold a normal conversation with him. It's easier to stay in my room. I've noticed dark lines on my neck, similar to the ones on my wrists. They twist and curl under my skin. If I keep a sweatshirt on, I can ignore them, but each morning they've spread a little more. I remember how worried I was about losing my hair to chemo. Now that seems insignificant compared to this. Day 3 of Daniel's absence. This morning, I attempted to test my connection more deliberately. I stood by the front window and focused on 3 infected figures roaming across the street. One paused, then all 3 turned to face me. It felt like I was drawing them near with a silent call. Mom witnessed it and gasped. I released my mental hold, letting them drift away. Afterward, I felt drained, as if I'd run a marathon. Dad asked me why I did that. I didn't know how to answer. Maybe I was trying to see if I could locate Daniel through them, but I didn't sense him at all. Later, Dad stayed in his room, not talking to anyone. He seems afraid, of me, of our situation, of everything. Day 4 of Daniel's absence. It's late, and I can't sleep. The infected outside moan occasionally, a low sound that resonates like distant thunder. I decided to go out the back door and see if I could scavenge anything from nearby houses. I found a neighbor's place that looked empty. The door was locked, but I pried a window open. Inside it was dark, with furniture overturned. I made my way to the kitchen, shining a small flashlight around. The pantry was mostly empty, but I did find a couple of canned goods. It felt strange to be rummaging in someone else's house, but we need supplies. On the way back, 2 infected figures stood in the alley. They didn't attack me. They stepped aside, letting me pass. Their eyes followed me, but I sensed no intent to harm. My presence reassures them or guides them. I'm not sure which. When I got home, Mom nearly broke down in tears. She thought I'd run off or gotten lost. I told her I was just trying to help. Day 5 of Daniel's absence. My body feels stronger in some ways, like I can walk longer distances without tiring. Yet my mind is constantly fighting the urge to feed on something I know is forbidden. If I lose control, I'm not sure I'd ever come back from it. Dad's health is wavering. He doesn't eat much and barely sleeps. Mum does her best, cleaning and organizing, but it's almost pointless now. Power has been gone for days, and the city's water pressure is dropping too. I looked over Daniel's older diary entries, the ones he kept for me during chemo. He always believed I could beat anything. I wonder how he would feel if he saw me now, balancing on this razor-thin edge between human and something else. Day 7 of Daniel's absence. Dad asked me about possibly leaving for a government safe zone. He said maybe the National Guard could help me. I told him it wouldn't work. I've read enough official updates to know they're overwhelmed. Transport is nearly impossible, and the roads are blocked by abandoned cars. Besides, the infected outside obey me here. If we leave, we might lose that advantage. He insisted that Daniel might be waiting for us. Mom remained quiet. She's torn between wanting to find Daniel and her fear of seeing me in danger. I told them both that if Daniel is alive, I can still sense him eventually, but so far there's nothing. Day 10 of Daniel's absence. We're on the brink of running out of canned food. I occasionally find ways to scavenge at night, but the supply is dwindling in nearby houses. Dad looks pale and exhausted. Mom tries to remain optimistic, but I see her hands tremble whenever she pours water or organizes what little remains in our pantry. She asked me if she could hug me today. I said no, worried that I might lose control. The memory of that moment stings. I see the pain in her eyes when I reject such a basic gesture. I read more of Daniel's final entries. He described me as having a mind of my own, yet carrying this infection inside me. He believed I might be key to controlling or stopping it. That's a heavy burden. All I know is I can keep some infected from harming us. For how long, I don't know. Day 12 of Daniel's absence. I took a significant risk this morning. I ventured farther than usual in search of supplies. Several infected wandered around me, but none acted aggressively. I tested my ability on a group of 4, beckoning them to step aside in a side street, which they did. In a small corner store, I found a few cans of beans and some bottled water left behind. Returning home, I felt a sudden urge. The craving roared inside my head when I passed a terrified stray animal. For a moment, I couldn't move, torn between instincts. Eventually, I forced myself to keep walking. When I got back, Mom nearly collapsed with relief. She must think I'll vanish like Daniel if I leave for too long. I wonder if the virus mutated in me due to the chemotherapy. Am I an odd hybrid that retains consciousness? No one can answer these questions. All the doctors are gone or unreachable. Day 15 of Daniel's absence. Dad's condition has deteriorated from stress, malnutrition, or both. I overheard him telling Mom that maybe it would be safer if they left me here and tried to find Daniel. Mom refused outright. She said she would never abandon her daughter. Hearing that should comfort me, but instead I feel guilty. I'm the reason we're staying. I might be the reason Daniel is missing. I decided to keep writing everything here in this diary. If Daniel ever returns, or if someone finds us, they need to know the truth. Not every infected is mindless. Some of us remain self-aware, fighting an internal battle between old humanity and new urges. Day 18 of Daniel's absence. The weather has turned humid. Without power, the house is stifling. We open windows at night to let in some breeze, but infected individuals sometimes gather outside. I can keep them docile, yet it drains me. Dad tried to help me rummage for supplies today, but the heat got to him. We barely made it back before he collapsed onto the couch. Mom fanned him with a magazine. I stood there, feeling that dark hunger gnaw at my mind. It took everything in me to stay calm and not see my weakened father as a target. I despise myself for even thinking that way. Day 20 of Daniel's absence. I step outside daily now, mostly at dusk or dawn. There are infected in the road more than ever before. They pay me no mind unless I focus on them. Then they halt, as if waiting for instructions. A few times I guided them away from our house, creating a perimeter of sorts. Mom approaches me timidly whenever I come back, asking if I'm all right. I can't truthfully say yes, but I tell her what she needs to hear. Dad barely speaks. He's losing hope in Daniel returning. Sometimes in the quiet, I imagine Daniel stepping through the front door with a backpack of supplies. He'd grin, say something sarcastic about my newfound zombie powers, and everything would somehow make sense. But that's just a fantasy. The reality is I can't sense him anywhere, and it's been too long. Day 25 of Daniel's absence. The yard is overgrown, and the neighborhood is a graveyard of abandoned cars and silent houses. Some nights, infected gather under the street lamps. I stand on the porch, controlling them like a silent conductor. They respond to my thoughts. It's bizarre and disturbing. Dad asked if we should attempt to walk to a government checkpoint rumored to be on the edge of town. I refused. There's no guarantee they could handle my condition. Besides, we have so little fuel, and our car battery is likely dead by now. He tried to argue but was too weak to keep pushing. Mom just held his hand. I feel a hollow ache in my chest. Part of it is hunger, part is grief for the life we once knew. Day 28 of Daniel's absence. I discovered some additional water bottles hidden in our garage, behind old boxes. It's a small victory. Mom thanked me, though she looked exhausted. Dad barely lifted his head to acknowledge it. They're both worn down, physically and emotionally. When I step outside at night, I sometimes notice larger groups of infected drifting along the main road. They move in packs now, maybe out of survival instincts. I can sense them from across the neighborhood, like a low hum in the back of my mind. If I concentrate, I can make that hum sharper, guiding them. But each time it costs me a piece of who I am. Day 30 of Daniel's absence. I'm writing this with unsteady hands. Last night was nearly disastrous. The craving in me escalated suddenly. I felt an overwhelming urge to feed on something alive. I locked myself in my room, pressed my back against the door, and forced my mind to recall every good memory I have. The time Daniel and I went fishing with Dad, the surprise birthday party Mom threw for me when I turned 16, our road trip to see a national park. Anything to keep the hunger at bay. Eventually, the feeling subsided, but I'm terrified of how close I came to losing control. In the morning, I ventured downstairs. Dad looked at me with an expression of guarded caution. Mom tried to ask how I was feeling. I gave her a vague answer and went to stare out the window again. And this my last notes. I don't know how long I can continue living like this. Yet I'll keep writing in this diary for as long as I'm able. If I disappear, it might mean I surrendered to the infection or left to search for Daniel. To anyone reading, understand that not every infected individual is a mindless creature. Some of us retain our memories, thoughts, and emotions, even as we crave what we shouldn't. Daniel, if you ever see this, you once said I was the bravest person you knew. I'm trying to honor that. I miss you more than words can say. I hope you made it somewhere safe. If I have to leave this house, I'll carry the memory of our family with me. If someone else finds these pages, please remember that the infection isn't always one size fits all. It changes people in unpredictable ways. Some remain self-aware, balancing on the edge between humanity and something else. I fight the urge to harm the ones I love every moment of every day. I end this entry here, uncertain of what tomorrow brings. My memories remain intact, but the virus tightens its hold each time I breathe. For now, I continue resisting. Yet I don't know which side of me will prevail in the end.
Kayla's diary ends here, but what became of her and the Whitmore family remains uncertain. What follows is a final account of what was found at their home. This entire diary, Daniel Whitmore's initial entries, and Kayla Whitmore's subsequent writings, was discovered in the Whitmore family home on Maple Avenue. The building showed clear signs of a prolonged quarantine and severe resource shortages. No final confirmation exists concerning Daniel's fate or the fate of Kayla and her parents, Martin and Valerie. Neighbors reported sightings of a solitary figure resembling Kayla quietly moving among the infected, exhibiting an extraordinary ability to direct them without being harmed. Whether she managed to save her parents or locate Daniel is unknown. In a city undone by an unknown virus, these records stand as testimony that not every infected being turns mindless. Some remain aware, locked in a struggle between a lingering humanity and an insatiable craving. If you ever encounter such an individual, or find yourself in a similar predicament, take heart in Kayla's story. Hope may persist where consciousness endures, even amidst a world consumed by an unstoppable force. Stay safe, and remember that where there is thought, there might be the possibility of understanding, negotiation, or even redemption. This is what Kayla's diary leaves behind. A testament that survival can take many forms, and not all of them are purely human. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.